Here's something most people don't talk about. Memory is a choice. We pretend it's automatic that the people we love stay with us simply because they once existed, but that's not true. Memory is work. It's the active decision to carry someone forward, to refuse to let them dissolve into the past, even when the rest of the world has already moved on. And the hardest part? Most of that work happens in private. No one sees it. No one applauds it. No one even knows it's happening. You just show up again and again to a place for a moment or a ritual that connects you to someone who's gone. And you do it because forgetting would feel like a second death. Here, that's the uncomfortable truth. We live in a culture that is terrified of this kind of sustained remembering. We're encouraged to move on, to find closure, to let go, as if love has an expiration date, as if the people who mattered stopped mattering just because they're no longer here. But there are people, quiet, unnoticed people, who reject that narrative entirely. They honor the dead not with public eulogies or social media posts, but with small, repeated acts of care that no one else will ever see. A visit to an unmarked grave, flowers left in the dark, a promise kept for decades. This channel believes something controversial. The most meaningful acts of devotion are the ones no one witnesses. They're not performed for credit or recognition. They're performed because they have to be. Because the alternative, letting someone fade into nothing, is unbearable. These acts don't make headlines. They don't go viral. They happen at dawn in empty cemeteries between one person and the memory of another. And they matter more than almost anything else we do. So here's the story. A cemetery groundskeeper named Thomas Rivera, who spent 9 years tending graves, noticed something strange. An unmarked grave in section D, no name, no dates, no epitaph, started receiving fresh white lily every Sunday. For 7 months, he documented the pattern. For 7 months, he tried to understand who was leaving them and why. And when he finally met the person behind the ritual, what he learned changed the way he thought about love, memory, and the promises we keep when no one's watching. If you're ready to hear about 36 years of flowers left for a man the world forgot, Let's begin. The grave had no name, no dates, no epitaph. Just a small rectangular plot in Section D of Riverside Memorial Cemetery, marked by a flat granite stone with nothing carved into it. Thomas had walked past it hundreds of times during his morning rounds, checking sprinkler heads, trimming edges, clearing leaves from pathways. For 3 years it had been as anonymous as a grave could be. And then, on a Sunday in early March, he found fresh flowers lying across the stone. White lily, still wet with dew, arranged carefully in a simple bundle tied with twine. No vase, no card. Just flowers on a grave that, according to every record Thomas could access, had never received visitors. The next Sunday, same thing. Fresh white lily, same placement, same twine. By the 4th Sunday, Thomas started arriving earlier, hoping to catch whoever was leaving them. He never did. By the 7th month, 28 Sundays straight, he documented every detail he could. The type of flowers, the time window they appeared, the way they were always placed at the exact center of the stone. And through all of it, one question grew heavier with each passing week. Who keeps a promise to someone the world forgot? Hear us what settled into Thomas's mind as he knelt beside that grave on a cold Sunday in October, replacing wilted lily with space for the new ones that would arrive. How many people are we honoring in silence? How many rituals are we performing that no one sees, no one records, no one knows to acknowledge? And when memory is the only thing left, what does it mean to be the person who refuses to let it fade? Thomas Rivera had been the head groundskeeper at Riverside Memorial Cemetery for 9 years. He was 53, with sun-darkened skin, calloused hands, and a tool belt that jangled softly when he walked the gravel paths between sections. The cemetery sat on 42 acres of rolling hills outside a mid-sized Midwestern town, shaded by oak trees that were older than most of the people buried beneath them. Thomas's job wasn't morbid, that's what people always assumed, but they were wrong. It was meditative, quiet, a place where time moved differently, where the work was repetitive but never meaningless. Mowing, trimming, planting, seasonal flowers at occupied graves, resetting headstones that had shifted in the freeze-thaw cycles. He knew every section, every path, every stone that needed releveling. Why did he care so much about the details? Because the dead don't speak, but the living who visit them do. Thomas had seen every kind of grief. The fresh kind, raw and staggering, where people collapse at gravesides and don't get up for an hour. The old kind, quiet and ritualized, where an elderly man brings the same flowers on the same day every year for decades. The complicated kind, where someone stands 15 feet back from a grave, unable to get closer but unable to leave. Thomas didn't intrude. He just made sure the ground was level, the grass was cut, and the space was cared for. It mattered. Even if the person buried there had no living visitors, even if the grave went decades without flowers, it mattered that someone tended it. That's what Thomas believed. The dead deserved that much. His routine was a loop he could walk in his sleep. 6 a.m. Unlock the maintenance shed, check the weather, load the truck. 6:30 a.m. Start in Section A, the oldest part, dating back to 1904, and work outward. 9 a.m. Water the newer graves in Section F11 a.m. Check for any overnight vandalism or storm damage. Lunch at noon under the oak near Section D, then afternoon maintenance, edging, weeding, repairs. Sundays were lighter. Families visited on Sundays, so Thomas kept his distance, working the perimeter, staying unobtrusive. It was on one of those Sunday mornings, walking through Section D to check a sprinkler line, that he first saw the Lila. The grave was in the back corner of Section D, a part of the cemetery that didn't get much foot traffic. It was surrounded by older graves, people who died in the 1940s and 50s, whose visitors had long since passed themselves. Thomas had always noticed this particular plot because of how blank it was. Most graves, even the old ones, had something, a name, a date, a phrase like beloved mother or rest in peace. This one had nothing. Just a flat gray granite marker, regulation size, positioned flush with the ground. He'd assumed it was a pre-purchase plot, something bought decades ago and never used. But the cemetery's records listed it as occupied interment, June 14, 1987. No name on file, no next of kin listed. The first Sunday he found the flowers, he almost walked right past them. It was early March, barely 7 a.m., and the morning light was still thin and gray. But the white of the lily caught his eye, too bright, too fresh, too deliberate. He stopped, crouched down. The bundle was simple, 6 white lily, stems trimmed clean, tied together with rough brown twine. No florist's wrapping, no card. They'd been placed at the exact center of the stone, parallel to the edges. Thomas picked them up carefully, checking underneath. Nothing, no note, no name. He set them back down and stood there for a long moment, looking around. The cemetery was empty. No cars in the lot. No movement between the rows. His first thought was that it was a mistake. Someone had left flowers at the wrong grave. It happened occasionally. People misremembered section numbers or confused similar-looking stones. But over the next week, as he passed the grave during his rounds, the lily wilted naturally. No one came back to move them. And the following Sunday, when Thomas walked through Section D at 7:15 a.m., there was a new bundle, same flowers, same twine, same placement. This time he didn't touch them. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, and realized he was looking at something intentional. Someone was visiting this grave, someone who knew exactly where it was, and they were doing it every Sunday, early enough that no one else would see. Topic 4. The pattern emerges, 8 o'clock to 15 o'clock. By the 5th Sunday, Thomas had started paying closer attention. He began arriving earlier, 6:45 a.m. instead of 7:15, hoping to catch the person in the act. He never did. The flowers were always already there by the time he arrived, dew-covered, and fresh as if they'd been placed sometime in the dark. Pre-dawn hours between 5:30 and 6:30 a.m. He started documenting what he saw. Same flowers every time. White lily, always 6, never 5 or 7. Same twine, rough, natural fiber, the kind you'd use for gardening, not gift wrapping. Same placement, centered perfectly on the stone, aligned with the edges. Whoever was doing this had a system, a ritual. Thomas also noticed something else. The flowers weren't expensive. They weren't the kind you'd buy from a florist. No baby's breath, no filler greens, no decorative ribbon. They looked like they'd been cut from someone's garden or bought in bulk from a farmer's market. Simple, unpretentious. The kind of offering that said, "I remember you, not look what I spent." There was something deeply personal about that. something that suggested the person leaving them wasn't performing for an audience. They were doing it because it mattered to them, regardless of who saw. In late June, Thomas decided to do something he normally wouldn't. He checked the cemetery's old records. The grave was listed in the logbooks as Plot D47. Interment date, June 14, 1987. No marker inscription requested. Payment made in full cash. Contact, none. That was it. No name, no age, no cause of death. Just a body buried 36 years ago, paid for in cash, with explicit instructions that no name be added to the stone. Thomas sat in the records room, the old ledger open in front of him, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Someone had wanted to disappear, to be buried without identity, without claim, without memory. And yet, here was someone else decades later refusing to let that happen. He didn't want to scare off whoever was leaving the flowers, but he also couldn't ignore the growing mystery. He started by talking to the cemetery's administrator, an older woman named Helen who'd worked there for 23 years. "Do we have any records of who purchased Plot D47? He asked. Helen pulled the file. "Purchased in 1987 by a law firm. Hastings and Rowe. They're not around anymore, dissolved in the late 90s. The payment was submitted on behalf of an anonymous client. No follow-up contact information. Dead end." Thomas tried a different approach. He started watching the entrance cameras. Riverside had installed basic security cameras 5 years ago after a vandalism incident, and they recorded everyone who entered the main gate. Thomas reviewed the footage from the past 4 Sundays. Every week, the same vehicle appeared, a dark blue sedan, older model, arriving between 5:40 and 6:10 a.m. It would park near the Section D access road, stay for 8 to 12 minutes, then leave. The angle of the camera didn't capture the license plate clearly, and the driver never faced the camera directly. But Thomas could make out a shape, an older person, moving slowly but deliberately, carrying something in their hands. He thought about approaching them, setting his alarm for 5:30 a.m. one Sunday and waiting by the grave to introduce himself, to ask the questions that had been building for months. But something stopped him, the privacy of it. The fact that whoever this was had been doing this in secret for years, maybe decades before Thomas ever noticed. They'd chosen the early morning hours for a reason. They didn't want to be seen. And Thomas, whose entire job was built on the principle of respecting the unspoken needs of the grieving, couldn't bring himself to violate that. So he kept watching, kept documenting, kept waiting for the pattern to reveal itself on its own terms. The encounter happened in early October, 7 months after Thomas first noticed the flowers. He'd arrived at the cemetery at 6 a.m., earlier than usual, to fix a broken sprinkler head near Section D. As he approached the unmarked grave, he saw a figure kneeling beside it. An older woman, maybe in her mid-70s, wearing a plain gray coat and a knit cap against the autumn chill. She was placing the lily carefully on the stone, adjusting them with slow, precise movements. Thomas froze. He didn't want to startle her, but he also didn't want to leave. He cleared his throat softly. The woman looked up, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. "I'm sorry," Thomas said, raising one hand slightly. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I work here. I'm the groundskeeper." The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "I've seen you working. You keep this place beautiful." Thomas felt a strange relief in her tone. She wasn't angry, just careful. "I've noticed the flowers," Thomas said. "Every Sunday for months. I didn't want to intrude, but I was curious. Do you mind if I ask who's buried here?" The woman looked down at the blank stone. For a long time she didn't say anything. Finally she spoke. "My brother. His name was Michael. He died when he was 23. Drug overdose." Her voice was steady but quiet. "He didn't want anyone to know. He was ashamed of how he'd lived, and he thought if there was no name on the grave, no one would have to carry that shame after he was gone. He made me promise no headstone, no record. Just a place where he could rest without being judged." She paused. "But I couldn't let him be forgotten. So every Sunday I bring him flowers. The lily were his favorite. I've been doing it for 36 years. Thomas felt something crack open in his chest. "You've never missed a Sunday?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Not one. After that morning, Thomas and the woman, her name was Diane, had an unspoken agreement. She'd continue her Sunday visits, and he'd make sure the grave was always well tended. He never asked more questions, and she never offered more details. But every time he walked past plot D47 during the week, he thought about what she'd said. 36 years of flowers. 36 years of waking up early, driving to the cemetery, kneeling on cold ground, and honoring a promise to someone who'd wanted to disappear. That kind of consistency wasn't obligation. It was love. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. The kind that persists because forgetting would be worse. The lesson here isn't about death, it's about memory. About the quiet ways we hold on to people even when the world has let them go. Diane's brother had no name on his grave because he believed his life wasn't worth remembering. But Diane disagreed. And every Sunday, with 6 white lily and a length of rough twine, she made that disagreement visible. Not to anyone else, just to him. Just to the ground where he rested. That's the power of ritual. It's not about grand gestures or public declarations. It's about showing up again and again when no one's watching. Here's the question for you. Who are you honoring in silence? What small, repeated act are you performing to keep someone's memory alive, even if no one else knows you're doing it? And what does it say about love real, enduring love that it doesn't need an audience to matter? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear about the rituals you're keeping, the promises you're holding, the people you refuse to forget. Let's look at what Diane's ritual actually reveals. For 36 years, 1,872 Sundays, she woke up early, drove to Riverside Memorial Cemetery, and placed 6 white lily on her brother Michael's unmarked grave. She did this in secret, not because she was ashamed, but because Michael had asked for anonymity. He wanted to be buried without a name, without a record, without a legacy. He believed his life marked by addiction and struggle wasn't worth remembering, but Diane made a different calculation. She decided that his request to be forgotten didn't override her need to remember him. So she found a middle ground. She honored his wish for privacy, but she refused to let him disappear. The flowers were her compromise, her proof that someone still cared. What does this mean for the way we think about memory and obligation? It means love doesn't end when someone dies, it just changes form. It becomes ritual. It becomes the decision to show up, to bear witness, to say, "You existed, and that mattered to me. Dan didn't need anyone to see her do this. She didn't need validation or recognition. The act itself was the point. And in a world obsessed with visibility, with documenting every moment for an audience, there's something almost radical about that. A private devotion. A quiet resistance to the idea that if no one sees it, it doesn't count. Here are 2 exercises you can try this week. Exercise 1. The Memory Ritual Audit. Think of someone you've lost, a family member, a friend, a mentor. Write down one small thing you do or could start doing to honor their memory privately. It could be as simple as lighting a candle on their birthday, visiting a place they loved, or doing something they taught you. The key is not for social media. It's not to tell others. It's just for you and them. Exercise 2. The Unmarked Acknowledgement. For 1 week, notice the unmarked, unnamed, overlooked things in your environment. A tree no one stops to look at. A bench with no plaque. A grave with no flowers. Choose one and do something small to acknowledge it. Sit on the bench. Touch the tree. Leave a single flower. Not because it needs you to, but because the act of noticing, of refusing to let something be invisible, changes you. Now, the questions. Have you ever kept a promise to someone who's gone, knowing no one else would ever know you kept it? What was it? What's the difference between honoring someone's memory and refusing to let them go? Is there a line? If you discovered someone was visiting a grave for decades in total anonymity, would you approach them, or would you let their ritual remain private? Share your stories below. I'm genuinely curious about the quiet ways you're keeping memory alive. If these kinds of stories about patience, devotion, and the things we do when no one's watching resonate with you, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. Quiet Witnesses is here to remind you that the most important acts aren't always the most visible ones. Sometimes they're happening at dawn in the back corner of a cemetery with 6 white lilies and a length of twine.